to this general meeting of NCCC in August, and I do hope everybody's coping. And if not, and if you feel that NCCC can help in any way, please do let us know. We have a change in the guest presentations today because the major projects team who wanted to update us about the light rail stage 2 project has signed out because of COVID rearrangements of their activities. So we'll welcome and have time for Peter Cain. He's the Shadow Minister for Planning and Land Management and would like to talk to us and with us about the planning review. So Peter, if you unmute yourself, maybe you could let us know how you want to take this issue to NCCC.
Well, thanks, Joachim. And I guess everyone can hear me okay? Thank you. Yes. And obviously happy to keep an eye on the chats and messages coming through. And I'll also drop in when I finish my own email address, so you can sort of chase me up later on if you've got some questions for me. I won't promise to take up all the time of the major projects, allocated major projects as well. So I'm sure we've all been staring at screens much of the day anyway, with working from home arrangements in place. But I do appreciate the opportunity. And I attended, regarding the current planning review, I attended 6 of the 8 district planning forums, including the Inner North one on the 26th of June at Ainsley Football Club. So I'm pretty sure I saw some of you at that. And it was, I have to say, in my opinion, the government has already decided what its planning review will result in. And I must admit, drawing on big sheets of plastic coated maps and things is certainly one way to get some information from the community, but really indicates that I don't think it's a very serious attempt to find out what the community wants in planning, and also relatedly in housing and transport. And I reflect back to a government-initiated survey, the Winton survey, which produced a report indicating Canberrans' clear housing choices. And it's very difficult to find that report, by the way, if you try and look for it. So I managed to find it. But we're looking at high 80s, low 90s of Canberrans who do appreciate a standalone home with a bit of space. And I don't think it's beyond hope for many Canberrans to realise something like that. But obviously at the moment, with a very developer-friendly regime favouring density and apartments, and a restriction on supply of release of land, I think it's the way prices have been moving was quite predictable. So look, I'm just happy to sort of talk generally, and then and welcome, just see how you want to chair any questioning, or just leave it to the chats and correspondence. But I don't think we've got the balance right in the way Canberra is being planned and the way land is being utilised. We don't have the balance right. As a local member for Ginninderra, one of my highest priorities is to protect green spaces. This is in Belconnen, of course. And it's really saddening to me to see dedicated areas for ovals and community use being left in very poor state, not being maintained. And I'm including in this ovals adjacent to primary schools, which just beggars belief, really. So to me, it's quite a deliberate decline in maintenance of green spaces. And I'm sure many of these spaces are on developers' drawing boards, not just in Belconnen, but elsewhere in Canberra. In fact, I might just briefly mention my background, because I do come with some professional experience in this area. For much of the last 10 years, I was elected in October, brand new face to the Assembly. Like my colleague, Rebecca there, I see her picture. I'm sure she's listening. So for much of the last 10 years, and there she is in person. Good on you, Rebecca, for a fraction. For much of the last 10 years, I managed the ACT government's tax dispute section, objections and appeals. So I'm still technically a lawyer on the Supreme Court books, even though I surrendered my practicing certificate. Finished 3-year stint as Vice President of the Law Society in September last year. And for the last 2 or 3 years in my government role, I managed LVC disputes in the tribunal, lease variation charge. So I got to see what developers had to face in terms of the planning regime and the tax implications of their desires. So I do have some understanding of how planning operates in the territory, particularly from the taxing point of view. But as I said, I don't think we've got the balance right. I don't see a vision driving planning except lots of land, high density and lots of it. And obviously that touches on revenue collection, having smaller parcels of land and many bits of them going high. It also strangely favours the developers' aspirations too. So I don't see the government really promoting the bush capital vision that this city is renowned for internationally, and I think is achievable, even though we're hitting the borders in a few areas. I think there is an oversupply of apartments, and a lot of that build is to favour the investment market as opposed to the community's housing desires. And I think we can do better. And I would like to see another review, another tender for world-class ideas to see what Canberra could look like in 100 years' time, even at our borders, as much as we can get there. Getting down to some sort of the micro elements of planning, I think the demonstration housing scheme was basically urban infill by stealth, medium density by stealth in RZ1 areas. And obviously we've kind of, our leader, Elizabeth Lee, has got a petition on one of those manor houses developments to get community feedback on that. So I'm not a fan of parcel by parcel variation of the territory plan. That just indicates really a sampling of the community's reaction to see if something's going to be resisted or not on a broader scale. And I'm pleased to accompany any community reaction to RZ2 development and RZ1 by stealth. And as I go about my door knocking in my electorate, I talk to people who buy a home in a suburb for a particular reason. They love the streetscape, they love the space, they love the character. And I pose the question, are you looking forward to a block of flats next to your home? And I haven't met anyone who is at this stage, so there may possibly be someone out there like that. So I think we can do better with height as well. I think it's not unreasonable to look at what was a result of the housing forum a few years ago. 6 levels is the highest, and I think it's a bit of a shame to see what's happening in my own electorate with the monster towers in Belconnen Town Centre. And these things will be part of the landscape, particularly on light rail and particularly in town centres, if the planning regime is not varied. I could talk about building quality. I could talk about the light rail proposal, but I'm happy to talk about specific things to do with the inner north. But that's kind of my very broad overview of how I see planning being conducted at the moment, how I see a planning review being undertaken that is not really got to focus on what the community's expectations are. And in my opinion, government is about meeting the expectations of the community that elects us as members.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you. Yes, so very broad, and I will drop my email in to follow up with any one of you or from the council as well on, you know, something that requires a little bit more detail and research.
So has anybody a question for Peter at the moment? Bruce. Bruce, you need to unmute yourself.
Right, am I unmuted?
Yes.
Right. Thanks for that, Peter. You said that you saw the need for an expansion of housing to address prices, but you're skeptical of the role of densification or infill or whatever it's called. So that suggests that there's going to need to be then a movement out into new areas around Canberra to build additional housing. I'm just wondering, really two questions. One is where you think that those new areas could be, and secondly, what are your thoughts about the environmental implications of in that kind of expansion, or in the words of its detractors, sort of sprawl further out to the edges of Canberra?
Thanks, Bruce. Well, on the so-called urban sprawl versus infill, I mean, you can do a bit of both. I mean, we're in favour of dual occupancies in RZ1 areas. So effectively, you know, on suitably sized blocks, you're going to increase the accommodation numbers quite significantly. In terms of expansion, I know that the Gin and Dairy development in West Belconnen has a proposal to absorb some of the Yass City Council area up to the confluence of Gin and Dairy Creek and the Molonglo. I still haven't quite worked out why that's the only straight line in the ACT's border when we had two natural boundary lines to work to. But I do think there is some option for some expansion. There is, as I said, the Gin and Dairy development has a proposal to extend the ACT's border west to accommodate that development in West Belconnen. But I've been out there a few times and spoken to the developers, which is obviously, and they're working in partnership with the government. What I haven't seen or heard anywhere is a really serious conversation between the ACT government, the Commonwealth and New South Wales about actually acquiring that part of Yass City Council. So it doesn't, that's such an obvious example of where moving our borders would actually make sense. It's an approved whole of estate development. You're going to have people paying New South Wales taxes 10 metres away from someone who's paying ACT taxes. And when you look at the rates differences, I'm not sure how they're going to say one gets the same services as the other, which is apparently the plan. So I think dual occupancy is a legitimate thing to try. And I think we need to explore other areas, particularly east and south, where expansions are a potential. And I haven't dived into too deeply here, but I have had a couple of briefings from the planning department, and they were just talking about that very question that you've posed, Bruce. You know, where can we go? Do we fill in? Do we just go out? How do we do a bit of both? And I said, well, what about moving east and to the northeast there. And the answer I got back was, well, the Chief Minister said no, which wasn't a particularly detailed explanation of why you're rejecting a proposal. And I had many reasons to seek a second briefing from planning. And I must admit, most of my questions in the second briefing were answered with, Mr. Cain, you'll be able to find that answer in the following report, which is not why I think you hold a briefing with a government department. So I think I've got a reasonable excuse for being disappointed with the briefing I've received from planning. But I think you can do a bit of both. And again, I think a lot of the build in Canberra at the moment is to suit the investor market. And I don't think that should be a priority driver for the release of land.
Thank you.
Okay. Joachim,
Chris,
can you hear me?
Ops.
Yes?
Yes.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, Chris Mobbs, Chair of the Hackett Community Association. Peter, you're probably familiar with the Monash Drive alignment along the foothills of Mount Ainslie Majura. It is still on the National Capital Plan, and while ever it's there, it's sort of, well, there's potential for some urban infill between the alignment and the houses in Ainslie and Hackett. I'd be interested in your position on lobbying to have that removed ultimately from the national plan. Welcome your views on that proposal.
I would be very happy to give you a view, but I don't have enough information to give you a view right now.
Okay.
If you want to flick me an email or on behalf of, or Joachim on behalf of the council, so it's not something I'm intimately aware of, but happy to have a look at it.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Can I just jump in then for the moment? The current planning review is not, as far as I can see, a forum to discuss large-scale opportunities for housing development in Canberra, but it's more about a change of the planning system related to how development applications are being assessed, whether it should be rules-based or outcome-based and so on, and to align the planning system with all these different strategies for climate change, for biodiversity, and so on and so on. So have you got a sense, beside the issues we have with consultation, where this planning review is actually heading?
My guess is it's going to be, whatever it looks like, it means that current RZ1 areas, it will be easier to do medium density developments in current RZ1 areas. That's where I think we're heading with this planning review. I'm sure there are many rules that developers would like, you know, less red tape in their processes, and you know, and I hear from them, and heard while I was doing my professional work how difficult it was to get things working smoothly and quickly. So I always have sympathy for red tape that really slows processes when there's not necessarily a good reason for it, except someone's got to think hard to make a decision. So I think the rules on development should be a lot clearer. And in a way, the work I did was all about the conflicts over the planning and the taxing of developments. And obviously, the fewer conflicts we have, the better for the whole community, basically, because they're very expensive exercises and slow things down.
So for me, the essential bit there is compliance management. If you have rules and they are not being implemented and not being enforced, then you have conflict.
Oh, look, I mean, this is like a general red tape discussion now, isn't it, in a way? I mean, rules are important, regulations are important, but sometimes they just keep growing, and people tend to sometimes forget, why do we have this regime in place in the first instance? So I think it is good to review that you haven't departed from your starting point of why you have a regulatory scheme, and whether things are added on just to handle a 1 in 100 event, which ends up tying everyone down unnecessarily. So there is a general discussion that's worth having about the red tape regime in Canberra, not just in planning, but elsewhere. I'm also Shadow Minister for Regulatory Affairs, Regulatory Services. So, and look, what I've seen can happen is you take your eye away from the policy driver that said we need to monitor something and we need to set some rules in place. And these things grow and grow and grow to kind of cover particular instances of non-compliance or policy gaps. And you end up having something that's burdening everybody when most of them are it's not necessary to get everyone to jump through these new and expanding hoops.
See, Peter, that's not a community concern, I think. The community concern is, for instance, that you have a proliferation of McMansions with huge block ratios of built systems penetrating old suburbs like Hackett. And when you ask the planning department whether they could check whether a project is actually within the rules of block ratios, they'll tell you, yes, you can ask, but they will only check when it's been built.
Okay, well,
that's what I mean with compliance management.
Sure. Well, I mean, you're suggesting they're not doing their job, I suppose.
Yep.
Look, I am sympathetic. I mean, I was 20 years with ACT government. I'm sympathetic to what the work of public servants do, and appreciate that there are occasions when it's really a lack of leadership that creates uncertainty or people not willing to make decisions. And for me, leadership comes from the top, and that is the minister's office. And so I do have sympathy for people. I don't think there's any intent to be deliberately obstructionist from a planning officer. But if they're not really sure what they're supposed to say, then that creates, that produces time wastage, perhaps a lack of openness to engage properly, because they're not quite sure what they're meant to be doing. And I'm not saying that's in every case, but to me, strong leadership will give people who work in any organisation the confidence to make decisions, obviously, that are consistent with the rules. And in a way, when you have that environment, if the rules aren't working, that becomes even more obvious when you're actually administering them with integrity and with confidence that you're being supported by the leadership of the organisation. And in this case, that is the Minister's office.
Marianne, you need to unmute yourself, Marianne.
Mute my video. There we are.
Now we hear you.
And I may just completely disappear because I've got a great drama with my NBN, etc. connections, but I won't go there. It's dreadfully boring. Peter, thank you. I just wanted to pick up a word that Joachim used just a little while ago, which is sustainability. And I would add existential issues with this. I can't see how we can plan without the data being made available as to how the infrastructure for the planning is going to be costed And where is the money going to come from? And where's the water going to come from constantly to not only continually expand the 30% canopy that we all want, which is a wonderful idea, and I'm not against it. I'm just a bit worried about where the water's going to come from. Growing trees need lots more water than established trees. I'm not saying don't let's start, but you know, the water's got to come from the extra people that are going to come. And I've never seen any real logical, and I'll use that word advisedly, logical justification for Canberra supposedly hitting 500,000 people, let alone the whole of Australia. I don't see that that is actually as sustainable. And we have major issues from the IPCC saying that we've got climate change coming down on us like a ton of bricks. Now, to me, population growth and expansion costs a bomb. Yes, it does oil the wheels of developers and various parts of the economy, but can we afford this? And where are we going? What's the end game of all of this? So I would like to see a whole heap more data underpinning the planning that is supposedly happening, because I actually don't think you can plan intelligently without really accurate, as well as you can make it accurate, data. And I don't see any evidence of this anywhere. You may know, maybe it's sitting in some report that we don't know about, but perhaps you could respond to my diatribe. I'm sorry if I sound quite passionate, but I am. I just see that, you know, this is a really important tipping point that the IPCC is saying. And what with population that's handmade and consumption, I think we're all going to hell in a handbasket. So over to you, Peter.
Well, and look, I can't answer the question on how's the government justifying its canopy and infill with adequacy of water, and also to mitigate against climate factors. So I can't answer your question, which really would be an answer that the government should be giving you, but certainly would encourage you to ask such questions of government. And can I say in written correspondence, because otherwise sometimes you have a discussion or go to a planning forum and you might hear nice words, but you don't know where the substance lies for it. So,
Peter, I mean, what Marianne is giving you is something you can raise in assembly. No?
Sure. No, I've made some notes. Thank you. Well, I certainly can do it through questions on notice. Look, I'm really keen to hear from you folk after this meeting. Again, I've been talking very generally. There's so many details in planning. And planning is more than just how land is zoned. It involves environmental considerations, water supplies, you've touched on, Marianne, transport, and also, you know, community desires, which include the whole range of human activity, from sports to arts, to education, to business. And you know, I've been attending a few of the Gungahlin Community Council meetings as well, and they're really concerned that their district has been turned into a residential dormitory for people to work elsewhere in Canberra. They want something better than that. And encouraging people to, well, discouraging business development in each of our districts really means that transport, there's going to be more pressure on the transport system, more emissions, more time lost traveling. So again, what I haven't seen is a vision that's driving planning decisions, except that, oh great, we have a light rail corridor, let's densify it. And the more of the corridor we have, the more density we can create. So I do see something that's being driven really from government and developers with almost the same commercial outcome. Lots of parcels, high and dense, lots of taxable entities from a government point of view, and obviously lots of sales for the developers. And I don't blame developers. They can only do what the government allows them to do. So they're in a business and everyone in business wants to do well. but it's the government that controls what they're allowed to do, and that's where the issue lies.
Look, Peter, if I can come in here, I mean, I come originally from a overpopulated Central European continent. So I have grown up in high density living environments, but I've also grown up in environments where you can, from the last village, reach everywhere in Europe with public transport. So my question to you as a liberal is, why is it that there is no federal funding to fund public transport infrastructure in Canberra? Because that's going to be an issue if you go further out, like in Ginninderry. It's an issue for Belconnen, it's the largest issue for Tuggeranong. Why is there no federal funding for the capital to have a proper public transport system?
Look, I'm aware the Commonwealth has committed some money for light rail, but not committed in the broad way that you're speaking of.
Yeah. I'm talking about at least one submarine worth.
Look, I'm not here to present a view of the Commonwealth.
No, sure, but that's, I think, the biggest strategy here.
Look, look, you're giving me food for thought. Obviously, we have a federal senator. Obviously, he is the one that can be lobbied in this way, as can I, on behalf of the Canberra Liberals and the Canberra community. But I'll take your comment and see what I can find out about that. I don't know that there is a general approach to Commonwealth spending on state and territory infrastructure.
There's an infrastructure fund.
Yeah, but it seems to be case by case almost, rather than broadly speaking. I mean, obviously education is supported by Commonwealth funding in part, and other areas of our societies, but I'm not quite sure about the position on public transport.
Peter Cullen, you need to unmute yourself. Good.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Peter, for your presentation. I should mention that I'm sort of standing in a little bit for Jane Goffman, who can't be with us tonight because of some COVID-related emergencies, and she obviously has sent her apologies for that. Let me also give support on behalf of the Dixon Residents Group to the comments that Marianne just made about long-term sustainability, which really is a very significant issue for the ACT, and particularly for the way it plans its future. And I'd certainly echo her call for data helping to inform long-term development of the ACT on a sustainable basis. What are the true costs, not just the financial cost or the economic costs, but the true overall costs of proposed development? So that's just a comment point. I have a question, and it really comes back to what you were saying at the outset about the pressure on available land. And I know you answered that in part by referring to possible opening up of new areas. But my question more specifically relates to the attitude of the, as it were, the alternative government in the ACT to the pressure that is being exerted and is evident in at least this suburb, and I suspect also in many of the suburbs represented, or residential groups represented in the North Canberra Community Council, and that's the pressure on community facilities land. there's scarcely a week or a month goes by without there being evidence that one or other community facility or one or other area of community facilities land is sort of resumed in one way or another and used for other purposes, forcing community services to look elsewhere or to cease to exist. And that's a real problem in itself. Plus the fact that some of the community facilities land is itself then turned into residential use of some kind is also a problem for communities, and particularly, I think, some of the inner North Canberra communities. So can you just spell out a little bit what the attitude is of, as it were, the alternative government or the shadow government to that pressure? And what is your attitude towards the rezoning of community facilities land for other purposes? Thank you.
Well, I mean, concessional leases, they were a frequent subject land in my tax work, whether it was a community oval or something else similar. Look, I will take that on notice. We are forming a planning policy as an opposition, and so everything that everything I said tonight, I believe has been, you know, endorsed by our shadow cabinet. If I'm wrong, then I'll get into a lot of trouble. So in terms of use of community land concessional leases, as I said at the opening, one of my top agenda items as a member for Belconnen is to preserve the green spaces. And there are lots of good reasons to do that, including not letting them turn into heat banks from a climate perspective, mental health and well-being, just having living, growing things around our suburbs, recreational options, of course, for the community in sport and other activities. Microforests, I think, are a terrific initiative. And I know you've got one in Downer in your area, and there's one to be developed in Holt. And I think Watson is also on the cards in your area again. So I can't give you a publishable position on our approach to rezoning of community spaces, except my intention as a local member is to preserve those in the Ginninderra electorate. And for me to change my opinion, I have to have a really compelling argument to do so. Someone's got their hand up there, Joachim.
Where? Who wants to speak?
Just me at the top, Joachim, if that's all right.
And also
Marcus.
and Peter too, and to Peter, you know, regards to your colleague, to Jane. I know she's got planning expertise, and certainly happy to have a conversation with anyone with that strong professional background.
Marcus.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Mike, I just like to return to the planning review, which is currently going on. And I'm a little unclear exactly what the planning review is attempting to achieve, but having read through some of the documents, one of the things that did jump out at me was that there seems to be an intention to put greater emphasis on government policy in decision-making rather than rely on presumably the rules and objectives of the territory plan. Now, I am aware that the territory plan has a relatively robust procedure for amendment that has to go before the Assembly, and it is debated and reviewed, and that does take some time. And in some sense, that's a good thing, because it does get a lot of debate and analysis in terms of territory plan reviews. this shift towards greater reliance on government policy, I'm wondering, as a member of the Legislative Assembly, do you have an opinion on whether that should be the approach that we take going forward?
Well, you're more observant than I if you can see a consistent government policy driving the current planning review. I really see a consultation program that's to conclude with, we consulted with the community and here is our outcome. And I think the outcome is, in my opinion, predictable, and that is to fulfill the 70% target of new residential releases will be in the current footprint. And I'm not sure I've picked up a strong policy driver, even for each of the districts. And as I said, I went to 6 of the 8 district planning forums. And there's a bit of a story how that came about. And the general presentation was the same. The only difference was the residents who were there and maps for each of the different regions for people to write their best ideas on. I don't see that as a strong policy driven planning review.
Did that answer your question, Marcus?
In a sense, yes, that's fine.
And again, really intriguing questions here, and they're very challenging questions as well. And I'm happy to be engaged. I've just dropped my email in. It's not a very hard one to find anyway. But I am really keen to engage. Look, and quite frankly, in something I've picked up, whether it's door knocking or a community council like this, I pick up ideas here. I thought, wow, I'm glad I met that person or came to that group, because there's an expertise in this council, as in all of them across Canberra. You're not here yourselves unless you're committed to your local community. You're spending your own time because you love Canberra, you love your district, you have ideas as to how it can be enhanced. And that's including ideas about our changing environment, the climate challenges, the growth challenges, changing demographics. So look, I'm not just being a political grandstand here. So bravo for all of you and in the community who really the government should be listening to, because you've taken time and you've done your research and you have ideas that are worth listening to.
Just Peter, on that note, sort of as you develop your policy, there are a couple of things that I think need attention. And one is the way community is being consulted.
Sure.
To find a way that is less, that basically leaves a lot of people very, very sarcastic about the process.
And I completely understand why you would think that.
And there are examples of how it can be done. And if you dig into the past a bit, there were, for instance, in the north, we had extensive interactions with government regarding neighborhood planning. If you look at the documents that came out of that exercise, they were really exemplary.
Sure.
But then they were buried. They were gone. And nothing came of them. And now we are being asked to do district planning and so on, which you were part of in the north, for instance. And again, the listening document that came out of that is all that needs to explain why people are sarcastic.
Yeah.
So
And I know we had Paul Costigan here with us a bit earlier, so he's written similarly.
Yeah.
I can
So
understand.
the other thing that you may want to concentrate on a bit is one of the community frustrations with the large scale developments that are happening all over the place, and here in North, especially along the Northbourne corridor, is that there are practically no contributions to the community of these developments. There are no parks for these developments. There are no playgrounds for old and young. There is no contribution to the common good. And one way of doing that is, apparently in other constituencies, is that if you have a large development, a certain percentage of the worth of that development has to be put into common goods.
That would be a good balance, in my opinion.
Yeah, but the current planning people don't like that at all.
Well, maybe we need new planning people. I'm not talking about the department necessarily here. So keep an eye on us.
Yeah. Okay, any further questions to Peter and, before we let him go? Then we let you go, but you can continue to be there, because I think a lot of the issues that we were discussing will be coming up again in this meeting.
Look, I'll happily remain with you if that's okay.